on the same page. So, Ms. Barker. And she'll take about 20, 30 minutes.
Are we good? Okay. Now I get to echo. It's awesome. Well, I'm so excited to talk to you guys today. I feel like we've had just a little bit time to recharge and recuperate from the session. Well, at least I have. I don't know about our representatives here, our legislators here. They're probably still kind of trying to recuperate and get back to normal a little bit. But I'm grateful to be here today. And what I'm going to be doing today is talking to you about what we consider our level 1 priority bills. So as a city, we were tracking just over 150 bills this last legislative session. Obviously, some of those passed, some of those did not. We prioritized those during the session. After the session, we have gone through and we have prioritized those into 3 different categories. The top tier category are bills that we believe are going to have some sort of significant policy, process, or legislative change attached to them. Level 2 bills are bills that will impact the city. They may affect policy and process, but won't affect our day-to-day operations too terribly much. And third tier priority bills are things that we were tracking because they may have some long-term effect to the city, or it may be something that we're going to be implementing at some point in the future, but it's more our choice to implement those particular bills. And so today, just for time, I'm going to be talking about those top tier bills. I want to start here, and I'm just going to do them. I don't want to give any special order, so I'm just doing them in order of bill number today. So we're going to start with one that will be impacting you as a legislative body, and that's House Bill 22. It's the open and public meeting modifications. Largely, we believe that we're in compliance with this bill. It requires a public body to establish how a quorum is created when they're conducting an electronic meeting. And that does need to be accomplished through ordinance or policy. And I know Dave will be talking about this a little bit later, but our role now is to go through our own ordinance and policy and see if we need to make any adjustments there. So because it affects this body, we definitely wanted to cover that as a level 1 priority, and it does potentially have an ordinance change or impact with it. The next one that we have
on that one, I'm just going to suggest on that one, let Alan and Cassidy handle that one, because we can do that by council policy and procedure. Doesn't have to be an ordinance. Let's just let the council office handle that.
Yeah. At this point, so this is kind of at this point we're kind of at the handoff stage. So my job is to kind of track the bills through the session, and then it's staff's responsibility to implement the bills. So slowly but surely, I'm working through all of our department heads. I think the only ones I have 2 department heads left, and then Alan. And I think this is the only bill that deals specifically with the council, and then it also impacts our planning commission as well. So as long I'm not sure what the ordinance says, and Dave, I don't know. Do you happen to know on this one if our ordinance already provides for this? Like, is there a change needed, or?
Our ordinance doesn't have it, but council
Okay.
policy talks about having the camera on at all. And so we just need to clarify that. So I think that's a very simple cleanup for us. And so the reason why I say that is let's try to, we know that the city attorney's been buried on this. And so I just want to try to alleviate some of the workload for the city attorney's office by saying the council can take that one.
Yeah, definitely. And that will be definitely up to you guys to work out. This is one that does require us to we're required to have this in ordinance, not just in policy. So it may require a little bit of extra work, but I'll leave that to you guys to determine how that will be handled. So that's the first one. The second one is House Bill 23, the very next bill. It's first responder mental health services agreements. And this particular bill, you'll remember us talking about during the session, it does require all first responder agencies, so including the city, to provide mental health resources to not just the employees, but their spouses, children, and retirees. You might remember from the session that we had some concerns about this bill because, first of all, we don't currently extend benefits to city employees' spouses and children of this type. So that will be a fiscal cost to us. Right now, our Human Resources Department is working to get a cost estimate on that. We know that the price tag for the state was about $5 million. So there will be a price kind of that goes along with that. We just don't know what it is right now. I anticipate that we'll know probably in the next 30 days. I know Denise is working to just include that with the budget that you'll be seeing coming up. The other challenge that we're going to be working through as we look at this bill is that the language is still, even after several modifications, fairly broad. So if an officer, say, works for South Jordan City, and we actually have this Officer Winkler who has come over to our police department, spent most of his career in South Jordan, retired, and then has come back to work for our city as an officer. You know, who pays for those retirement benefits when he retires? He spent most of his career with South Jordan. Now he may spend a couple years with our city. Who, in the end, how does that shake out? Who's responsible? Is it the last organization? Is there some sort of balance? That's something that we're still trying to dive into and figure out exactly how that will impact us. But just kind of wanted to make you aware of that one as well. The next one that I wanted to talk about today is House Bill 96, Government Records Fee Amendments. This was a bill that we were neutral on that passed. It does require an adjustment in practicing and pricing for our records management in both the police department and in our recorder's office. It makes it so the first quarter hour of records research and management is free. Unless there is a caveat, it follows within 10 days of a prior request. So sometimes we like to call them frequent flyers. They file many requests in a very short period of time, frequently, and then kind of expand that over a longer period of time. So that's one that will be, that law goes into effect in May. We'll be looking to implement that. So not a big cost to the city by any means, but certainly a change in practice. House Bill 121 is water conservation modifications. We believe this prohibits municipalities from requiring lawn or turf requirements. We actually believe that we're in compliance with this particular bill. You might remember talking about it during the legislative session, and I was very complimentary of your efforts as a council over the last year to make modifications that actually put us in a position where I believe we're in compliance. So at this point, the question will be kind of going back through that ordinance and making sure that we are actually in compliance with the law, but we believe we are at this time. So I just want to move down. The next one is House Bill 303. This is the bill downsizing notice amendments that modified changes to how we notify in land use regulations. This bill was heavily modified over the session. So where we talked about it originally, it's changed quite significantly. And this is going to require quite a look by our legal department at how things are going to shake out. We anticipate that there will be some impact to process, in particular in Scott's department and the community development department and how they notice things. But I don't think this will have a significant fiscal impact on the city at this time. House Bill 399. This is one that we included because it was a real priority for us during the session, although I don't believe it has any specific impact. And I know Dave will be able to talk quite a bit about this one when it's his time. This was the Government Records Amendments, and you'll remember this by its nickname that we called it, which was the Garrity Legislation. So this is the legislation that protects Garrity statements for public employees. And this was obviously a big initiative over the last year. So I know you heard about it over and over and over. So I bring it up today just to let you know that so much work was put into that. I put so much credit in the work of Dave Quayle, of Chief Wallentyne, of the League of Cities and Towns, certainly the bill's sponsors, just so much effort and so much work put into that. Gosh, I think we've been working on that one for at least a year at this point. Don't you think, Dave? So I make mention of it because it was such a big initiative for the city, and we worked so hard on it. Although at the end of the day, the impact is that we don't have to produce those Garrity statements, which I know you've heard quite a bit about why we feel so strongly about that. So just wanted to make mention of it tonight. House Bill 440 was homeless services amendments. You'll remember this one coming up at the end of the session, and we talked a fair bit about it. This requires counties of the first class to have homeless overflow plans. Those plans are developed and ratified by COG, and COM is the body that's designated to kind of set that plan up. So the mayor very kindly and graciously volunteered me to sit on that COM committee. So our first meeting is actually in 2 weeks, and we'll be talking about that homeless services plan. As we went through this bill, you may remember there was a lot of question about where these temporary overflow shelters could be placed. The bill does provide some limits. They're very similar to what you see in the alcohol legislation or in legislation about sexually oriented businesses, in that they give a certain amount of distance from things like churches, schools. There's even a buffer for a residential zone. I have our GIS department working on an overlay map that I'm going to be able to take with me in a couple weeks to this meeting. And I have to tell you, there are very few places in our city. This is when being something of a bedroom community really benefits us, because we have so many more schools and so many more churches than most of the other communities, that potential mandate placement on this would be pretty challenging in our city. Having said that, there is an anticipation that our city will host a temporary overflow shelter at the least once every, or at the maximum, I'm saying it wrong, at the maximum once every 4 years, unless we choose to host one more often. There is a fiscal impact related to that. There was some funding provided in this bill that we can apply for. We anticipate that the amount of funding that we would be eligible for is in the range of about $250,000. So I want to put this in perspective for you, because when I talk to Chief Wallenstein, he tells me that $250,000 will be eaten up by police fees within a month. So the cost of hosting one of those overflow shelters could be fairly significant, and a fairly significant burden that the city would be responsible for bearing, simply because there just wasn't enough money set aside for cities to tap into. And the estimated size of that temporary overflow shelter would be about a 75-bed shelter. And the challenge for us comes with the fire code. The fire code requirements with that require 40 square feet of space for every single bed. So to put that in perspective, because I compare everything in my life to retail. I'm so sorry, but things are a Nordstrom or a Target, and this is like about the size, at a minimum of a CVS or a Walmart, a larger a CVS or a Walgreens. Thank you. Thank you for knowing what I was saying. You guys are my translators. This is the best. We're on the same page on this. So you can see where some of the challenges would lie with this particular one. And I think it's going to be very, very tricky for COM to actually come up with a plan. I'm honestly a little nervous that this will end up with the state as a mandate, because I think all the cities are going to kind of come to the same table with similar issues. I don't think anybody has a lot of extra money to spend on this. I don't think anybody has a lot of extra space right now because of how well we're doing with economic development and retail placement in all of our cities. So I think it'll be a challenge, but I'll keep you updated as I attend those meetings and let you know the direction that we're headed. I also wanted to touch briefly on SB 46. This is the medical cannabis patient protection.
Hey, Tawny.
Yeah.
HB 439 actually had some impacts. It was Cheryl's bill out of, and even though it's called public body transparency, it was actually a modification to OTMA. If there's any modifications, the council will take that one. So yes, because it's a very minor, because our practice, the way I read the bill, our practices meet the law.
Yes.
What we've got to do is just decide if we want to codify our practices or not. So we'll take that discussion on here over the next couple of months, and we'll deal with that.
Yeah, that would be correct. We have that one on our, and sorry, let me back up and say one thing. All of this is on that tracker spreadsheet that I provided you with early in the session. So you can actually see where we've prioritized it and where it falls and all of that. So we put this as a level 2. We know it has an impact on the city. However, because we're already following this policy largely, in our documentation, there's no real anticipated impact. So that's why it's at that level 2. There's an impact. We think we're okay. So you're 100% right, council member. And we do anticipate that will again be with the council office and with the planning commission. So I'm going to hop back down to Senate Bill 46. This one is the bill that our own Senator Thatcher passed that protects public employees who are holding a medical cannabis card. You might remember that there was some concern amongst our public safety employees regarding this bill. In particular, we believe it may affect some of our federal grants and our ability to receive federal dollars. And so we were very supportive of a follow-up bill. And boy, gosh, off the top of my head, I've got to scroll down here. It was Senate Bill 190, which was Medical Cannabis Act amendments, which was sponsored by Senator Vickers. We were very supportive of that because that bill went back and kind of clarified the first. So, boy, Senator Fillmore, Representative, if you have anything to weigh in on, please feel free to jump in at any time, because I know you guys were in the heat and the thick of these discussions. So. We believe there will be, again, we believe there will be an anticipated impact on this one. We're not quite sure where that will be. I'm sure Dave will fill you in on how far the attorneys have gotten in terms of reviewing that particular piece of legislation. So the next level 1 bill I wanted to talk about is Senate Bill 89, which was water amendments. This one, again, is, a lot of bills around conservation up at the legislature. That was a major initiative. This one requires municipalities to file a conservation plan with the goal of meeting specific regional goals set by the state. This will be something that Public Works will be working on. We do have an existing conservation plan, and in discussion with Brian Clegg, we believe that we'll largely be able to update that conservation plan and continue to move forward. Part of it will depend on those regional goals that are set by the Division of Water Resources. And the part where you guys will become involved is we do have to hold a public hearing on that plan, and we do have to end up in the end publishing it. So you'll definitely be seeing that come across your desks. Probably, my guess is we'll start to get those regional goals and things like that towards the end of summer. So I think we're probably looking at more like a fall-winter implementation of that one. And then that actually brings me to the next one, which is also a water bill. I know we talked about this, but this will be familiar to you. Senate Bill 110. This is called Water as a Part of the General Plan. It doesn't encourage us. It tells us that we need to adopt water use and preservation as a part of our municipal general plan by December 2025. I know we talked a lot about this particular bill during the session because you guys are in the midst of updating the general plan. And the idea is that we may be able to fast track that and include it as a part of the general plan. As I've talked to Brian, again, we believe we have a water use and preservation plan in place. So we believe that we'll be able to update that plan and that can be incorporated as a part of the general plan as you guys move forward with that. So we'll be looking to see some rules come through on that one. But I think we're in pretty good shape there. Senate Bill 126 is Officer Intervention Reporting Amendments. And this one sets minimum standards for police misconduct. We supported this one. This was a bill that Chief Wallenstein really championed up at the legislature and was pretty involved with developing policy around. There will be some minor changes to our police policies, we believe. Those will happen through the Lexipol program. However, based on our current operations, the chief does not see any major impact to the police department. This is kind of how he's already running things, and so he doesn't anticipate a major fiscal impact tied to this one. However, it's one that we'll want to look at very closely with legal and with the police department and make sure that we're on the same page. We already talked about SB 190, which was that update to the cannabis. And then the last one that we have on here before I get to the last one, which takes the most time, is is SB 140. That's the housing and transit reinvestment zone. No changes to process or policy on this one. It's just an important one, as it's one that our city could certainly take advantage of. And it's an additional tool that can be used. So we're taking a really close look at how that might be implemented in the city. And obviously, that would take place kind of between Chris Pangra and Scott Langford's department. So that kind of brings us to the big daddy, right? I did. I skipped this one. I was waiting for you to call me on it, Councilmember Green.
I we're saving the best for last.
That's for last, right? So HB 462 was the Affordable Housing Bill. This is the one that will have definitely the largest fiscal and policy process impact on the city this year. And you'll remember we had many anxious conversations about it I think that's the best way I can put it, anxious conversations about it during the legislative session. This particular bill in the end will have I've broken it down into 3 main categories, and I am just going to briefly share what those categories are with you and tell you that we really are going to have a lot of work on this one. The first is that it has modified the moderate income housing plans. In our city, the impact will be that we will need to expand our moderate income housing plan, and we will have to adopt additional menu items from that. You'll probably remember when you went through that about a year or 2 ago, 2 years ago. Time flies when you're having fun, right? So about 2 years ago, we went through that. We picked several menu items. So the first part of it is we are on the hook for updating our moderate income housing plan and adopting additional menu items. The second part of that first bit is that there's going to be additional reporting required. As a part of this, we will have to report on progress on our moderate income housing plan. I anticipate that this is going to create a fair amount of work for Scott's department. Yeah, Councilmember.
I'm gonna ask the obvious question.
Yeah.
When we submitted, and Scott, maybe you can help us. When we submitted the moderate income housing plan 2 years ago, 70% of the housing in West Jordan met the moderate income housing level. Now we're at 50 because market prices have gone nuts. But the question is, what's the end state? I mean, it sounds like we're being required to pick additional menu items, but what's the end state goal for the percentage of affordable housing? If we already have 50% affordable housing or moderate housing in the city, and that's more than let's just hypothetically, because I don't know, but let's hypothetically say that's more than South Jordan, or that's 20% more than South Jordan, or that's 50% more than Sandy, or whatever. Is there a target number there, or what's the set level of having affordable housing? What's the goal? I guess that's great. You say, hey, you have to have all these components, but what's the end state goal?
Yeah, so I'm going to start out by saying I am not qualified to provide an answer to you. I really am not. I would love to say I've got it written down on the palm of my hand here, right?
Meaning of the statute in the statute.
You're right. This bill does take some additional steps in defining what affordable housing is. And I can tell you that we have done a significant amount of work with members of the legislature in pushing them to further define that. And I think our legislators here can tell you that there's been a lot of conversation about this. They're aware that it's an issue. But I believe that that's still a little bit of a moving target with where we stand today. I don't think we're quite there. So I can tell you we're working on it. I can tell you that's a conversation that comes up every time. In fact, I will tell you that the league staff is so tired of me asking that very question that I might get kicked out of meetings in the future. But it is something we continue to ask, because there is this question of what is affordable housing. And sometimes we lean on the idea that density equals affordable housing. And we know here in West Jordan that's not true. We've got density. We've got housing right on tracks lines. We've got all of the things, right? All of the checklist items. We've got them in our moderate income housing guide. But we know that those things don't necessarily bring more affordable housing. And the challenge for us as a city, and this is something we continually share, and if our legislators, I mean, they're like, we're sick of hearing this because they have heard it from us so much, is that as a city, we can't create affordable housing. We can create zoning that would allow for affordable housing. We can encourage affordable housing. You know, when you were working on the master development agreement for Wood Ranch, we had a set aside. I think it's 10%, or am I wrong? Jones Ranch. I'm sorry, Jones Ranch. We should come up with names that don't end in ranch, maybe. So just for my benefit.
Another thing that we didn't come up with.
So I believe that we're doing everything we can as a city. But at the end of the day, developers are going to sell housing for what they can sell housing for. And that doesn't make it more affordable. And that's really the question facing all of us. And I'll tell you right now, I think that there isn't a member of the legislature or a member of the team that's been working of the Affordable Housing Commission that wouldn't welcome a conversation about, oh, here's our idea for creating affordable housing. They're all open to it. I think everyone's looking for the answer, and we simply haven't found it yet. So, council member, I'm sorry I can't directly answer your question, but I think I can tell you it's something we continue to work on.
Really what we're saying, let me turn this back up. Really what we're saying is there's no target goal. And
not a specific target
goal. There's not a specific target goal. So what I'm going to be mean because there's 3 legislators sitting here, but what the legislature's saying is just increase it. Just increase it. And that's, trying to set a goal like that's hard.
Yeah.
But what I do agree with you with, and I've started to use this analogy. I do agree with you that density does not equal affordability. And I will tell you that developers, when they're given unlimited density, pick the option that makes them the most money. I know a not neighboring city, but it's a city in this valley who is near a rail station. I won't say whether it's Trax or Front Runner. It's near a rail station. They put in a zone that they could go unlimited height, unlimited density, and the developer only built. We won't Draper, but they only put in a 4-story. They only put in 4-story buildings because that's wood construction and it's the cheapest, and that's what they can get away with.
Right.
So, what I get frustrated with, and I want to put it on record, what I get frustrated with is the developer that comes in and says, we want density. We want density. We want you to line. What I'm going to say is behind the scenes. We want you to line our pockets. But when you give them density, they don't use it because that doesn't line their pockets, because it means they have to go above 4 stories, which means they have to go to steel construction instead of wood. And so, I mean, even when we built the new ones over at Jordan Valley TOD and we just approved those new apartments, how tall were they? They were 4 stories because that was the cheapest construction, even though they could have gone taller because they were in it. They could have gone to 70 feet, if I remember right, because it's in a TOD, and they stopped at the 45 or 50 with the 4 stories. And that's the kind of thing that frustrates me, is that what you have in the legislature are developers that are providing, I'm going to tell you, a jaded viewpoint saying it's the city's all bad. But when the city allows certain things, then they choose not to do it because it's not in their best interest but they're the first ones to throw the city under the bus with the legislature.
Yeah, Councilmember, I really appreciate your comments, and just kind of in line with that, this last week, I was just doing kind of a little fact finding, and I looked up those apartments at the Jordan Valley TOD to see how much they rent for. And the smallest apartment in that apartment building rents for over $2,000 a month. And it's more than my mortgage. And I certainly wouldn't call that affordable. So I'm very cognizant of your time. I know we're a little bit over right now. Let me wrap up with the last two items in this particular bill so that we can move on. And then I'm obviously going to be here, so if we need to circle back to anything, we can. So the second part of that is some adjustments to the ADU language. You'll obviously remember we updated our ADU ordinances not that long ago. I believe that we're probably in compliance, but there needs to be a second look by our legal department to determine what, if any, and maybe Scott, you and Dave may be speaking to this a little bit later, but that is an area that we're going to have to look at. And then the third and final area is the requirement for us to build station area plans around all of our fixed transit routes. We end up being one of the top tier cities in this. We do have 6 stations that eventually we will be providing station area plans for. I'll remind you that one of the things that we negotiated when this started out, it was you will have a station area plan for every station, and it will be within like a year. We were able to pull back on that a little bit. And where we're at now is we will be doing 2 station area plans per year with a completion date of 2025. So we were able to walk that back a little. I do want to remind you that there are 2 ways that a station area plan can be initiated. Council member, you can look. I feel like by looking at me, you're looking right at the sun. But there's 2 ways a station area plan can be initiated. The first is that the city can decide we're going to create plans for these 2 plans or these 2 stations. The second is that if we're approached by a developer with a plan within the range of where that station area plan would be, that would automatically trigger the requirement for us to create a station area plan for that particular station. So 2 kind of ways that can happen. I will tell you we're a long way out for knowing exactly what those station area plans need to look like. We have a general idea. You'll remember probably passing a station area plan in late, I think it was either 2018 or 2019. 2018? That we passed the city center station area plan. Anyway, a couple years ago, we passed a station area plan. It's 2019. Okay, so we passed a station area plan for the space just right across the road here. That we do know that plan will not meet the needs of these new station area plans, so it will need to be redone and updated.
Morgan, you just got
good job.
Facilities director.
Thank you.
So we know there's going to be some significant work there. I think very, very conservative fiscal estimates for the cost on just the station area plan portion of this are somewhere between the $500,000 and $750,000 range. Unfortunately, this doesn't come with any financial support, so we will be on the hook for paying for those station area plans. There is some funding that will go to the MPO, which for us is Wasatch Front Regional, but they don't anticipate that we'll see that money. So I think you can plan on being on the hook for that. With that, those are go ahead.
And ballpark, I've heard 200,000 for our city. Have you heard any numbers?
Ballpark on what?
Station area plans.
Oh, on the cost?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no. That's the $500,000 to $750,000. So the cost of our last station area plan.
No worries.
I think where you're getting that 200,000, council member, is the cost of our last station area plan. When I looked back at the notes, and Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, was right around $250,000. So We are looking at it from the idea that if we kind of bulk plan these and if we use the MPO, we will be able to get it a little bit lower per plan, which is why we have the $500,000 to $750,000 range. Yeah, council
So when
member.
we're talking 500,000 to 700,000, is that hiring outside contractors to consultants to do that? That's not hiring staff. That's not our staff doing that.
Right, and they're about $100,000 per plan. At least that's what we spent across the street.
One of the things, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't know yet if the best approach is to do it all with outside consultants, in-house, a combination of the two. Our planning staff are spread thin, so we'll likely need some help in some form or another, but we're still working through how best to tackle this.
The reason why I asked that question is, at least in my mind, I think it would be more cost effective and beneficial for the city, honestly, if we're going to spend $500,000 over the next 3 or 4 years. Scott, I'd rather hire a staff member for you to solve the problem and have them do it than give an outside consultant the profit margin for that. You know where I'm going? So
Thank you. Anything else, Ms. Parker?
I think that's it. The only thing that I'll close with is with that price tag. One of the reasons that Denise and I put that fiscal estimate on it is because all of the cities with fixed route transit are going to be going through this, which means the demand for this particular type of planner is going to go up, both if we hire someone internally and if we're trying to hire an external service. So that's why the price tag ended right about there. And I don't, now this is way over my head. So this is something I talked to Denise about, but to put it in perspective, this ends up being about a 2% property tax increase to cover this. Now, you know, and that would be, you know, to cover it over time, not to cover it in 1 year. So I really want to put in perspective, kind of, you've heard some of the fiscal impacts tonight. These are just the level 1 bills. The level 2, obviously, we believe have a smaller fiscal impact. But I just want to put that into perspective for you as you go into the budget season. And with that, Council Chair, thank you so much. Council members, legislators, thank you for your time. I'm here all night. So I know we've hit a time, but if you have other questions, I'm happy to answer those after the fact.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I neglected to acknowledge that we have several staff members here. Thank you. As well as our mayor. Mayor Burton is here with us tonight also. So thank you for being here. The next portion of our agenda is we would like to hear from you. And from Representative Ivory joined us as well. And so we'll let ladies go first. It would just take, you know, about 10 minutes and tell us what you want to tell us, your successes.
There you go.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I had some bills that were I was really excited about this year that passed, and in fact all my bills passed, but so I was excited about that. But the one, and I think you're probably familiar with it, was the child care bill, and that has some implications on cities. But the goal of the bill is to create a greater capacity for the child care industry, because many of you know that we don't have enough child care to meet the needs in our state. And so some of the things ways that it increases the capacity, and it, like I said, has some impact on cities, and I think really positively, but it makes building a child care facility an acceptable use for the tax increment financing that is used with developments in a development. And that would be at the discretion of the, you know, the financing committee, the cities, and so on. And I will tell you that I have had child care people say, how do I do this? And I say, go talk to your city, you know, and see if there's a spot where that would be appropriate. And then there would be some startup grants for the individual that was selected to contract with the the businesses in the area to provide the child care in the facility. And there's startup grants for that. There another thing that impacts the cities is there was some, and I don't believe West Jordan was one, but there were some municipalities that child care people tell me have licensing requirements that exceed the state's licensing requirements. And turns out it was already in code that isn't supposed to happen. And so we clarified that. And again, I don't believe I've heard about West Jordan, but I have heard about some. And just being clear about that you can't exceed the licensing requirements of the state. So just helping our in residential license child care people have the ability to do their job and again, increase capacity. There's some other components of the bill. You mentioned TODs. There also is a opportunity to put child care in a TOD zone. We're thinking that would be a really good fit for a TOD zone. And then, I mean, this was mainly targeted at rural Utah, but it could be in anywhere that you can move from 4 to 6 on unlicensed people. Children in a residential childcare with a cap of 10. And before that, there was no cap. So I don't know. That's one bill that I'm excited about, and I really hope it starts showing a good impact soon because the need is great. The other one that I had that is saying solicitation, that when a buyer is arrested for solicitation, that the court would be required to have the individual take a class, an educational class in the harmful effects of prostitution and trafficking. And that, the other parts of the penalty would remain the same. But they have found in other areas, municipalities where this has happened in other states, that the recidivism rate has dropped 40 to 60%, which shows the effectiveness of it. So I think those are the two that might have some impact on the cities.
Great, thank you. Online, we have Senator Reeby, but I can't get her unmuted. Can you, Alan?
I am unmuted now.
Oh, great, go ahead. And
Hi. Thanks. I'm so excited to be a part of the West Jordan team. It's kind of exciting to move my district a little bit and meet some new people. I was checking out the City of Leagues and Towns tracker as you were mentioning all those bills, and looking at what our votes were and what people were talking about. So it's nice to, maybe I should use that term loosely, it's nice to go over those bills, actually some of them again. 3 bills that I was running were captured in other areas and rolled into different programs. So those were abandoned. One of them was about charter schools, nurses and school psychologists and mobile crisis intervention units. And even though I didn't run those bills, I was glad to see that they were captured in other areas. So that's my celebrations. I'm still working on a Office of Nurse Student Health. And when I brought this bill up, people were kind of excited about it and they wanted to get it included into higher ed as well. So I kind of held that one so that I could talk about it more. I do celebrate that I'm trying to work really hard with the rurals. I know that we were talking about some of that affordable housing and counties of the first class. And I like to remind people that we are the only county of the first class. And so when we point us out, it's really sometimes a negative impact to just our county. So as I've worked really hard to build relationships with our rurals, I'm always trying to say that I would love to work to make things better for your county as long as you're working to make things better for my county. So those are some of my celebrations and some of the work that I try to do. And also just education. I'm a big advocate for education. Sorry, I'm on vacation and I'm outside. Sorry.
Thank you. Senator Fillmore.
Thank you. I don't play a lot in the political subdivisions space of the legislature. I mostly work in education and taxes. But one success that we had this year had to do with House Bill 140, or Senate Bill 140, which we talked about earlier. The county drives a lot of those decisions. And so the bill, as was originally drafted, was pretty friendly to the east side of Salt Lake County, where the power center of this county is. And I often get frustrated that we treat Salt Lake County as though it's all Mill Creek.
I'm glad somebody said that besides me.
So, working with the sponsor and West Side cities, we were able to amend that bill to provide additional flexibility for West Side. Right, we just have a lot of growth out here, so we were able to expand the scope beyond what Mill Creek wants. But that's fine, right? Mill Creek's mostly built out. They can do the kinds of things that they want to do, but it's very frustrating to me when the county mayor or the county itself wants to say, well, what we like for us is exactly what you guys like for you, right? We ate our pie a few decades ago and it was good enough for us. So now we don't want pie anymore. We just want, a little petit four. And so you guys can eat all a petit four too. When we kind of still need the pie. Anyway, so we worked at an amendment on that. It passed. I was very happy about that. It was a good success. Other than that, I had a couple of tax bills that have minor impact on the cities. I think one of those would be the property tax deferral, which will allow low-income senior citizens to defer property taxes. The big success there was getting $8 million in state funding to create a bridge so that city and county budgets aren't negatively impacted while we work to keep low-income seniors in their family homes. And then Senate Bill 93 was the elimination of double taxation on business inventory and inputs. That expanded the tax exemption for resale to include what is resold in a taxable service, which is like this one little double taxation thing that already exists there, right? You guys know I own a bakery and I don't pay tax on my flour, but if you Quick Quack car wash, they pay tax on their soap, even though their car wash is taxable at the end. And so essentially the consumer is paying sales tax on the soap and then sales tax on the sales tax of the soap. Just working to eliminate that double taxation, and then the property tax that exists on supplies that a business keeps in inventory. So from a property tax standpoint, that washes out on a statewide basis. But the sales tax exemption is probably going to have a very minor, like a $2.5 million impact statewide on sales tax revenue. So there'll be, something that you'll need to think about.
Of course, we got 12 car washes in West Jordan City. So.
Yeah, car washes are going up many places really fast.
Got a lot of dirty cars. Representative Ivory, we'd like you to take 5-10 minutes to tell us about your session and anything you want to share.
The right
that one? Okay, there we go. No, good. Thank you. I'm excited to be here and get to know new faces. I haven't met some of you. I think I'm one of the oldest and newest members of the legislature, so it was interesting to come back in and not have the lead time, the run up to get ready and work with people and work bills up. So I had just a couple of things that we had come in as I was getting in. I think that might have an impact on cities. Most of it, I was the vice chair of the Social Services, the Health and Human Services Appropriation Committee, and that's a really unique committee. We meet every single day for the first 3 weeks, and it's a pretty challenging load. One of the things I'm really pleased with is with a lot of the funding issues that we had, we were able to take a lot of people off of the waiting list for the DSPD, the people with disabilities, and we had a really massive issue, as you know, on the wage gap that we have with the private market. that with the inflation issues that are happening, we're having really tremendous wage gap issues at the state mental hospital with people caring for any of the people with disabilities and different needs. So we did a lot of work to try to close that wage gap. And then the stories of people on the waiting list of the people with disabilities. I mean, they have people that have been on the waiting list 15 years. And they recalculate it all the time, and so you think you're climbing up the list with a child with autism or something, and the stories were really just really heart wrenching. But they would work their way up the list, and then they would recalibrate the list, and so they thought they were up to 100, and then they're back to 1,000, but we were able to get, I think, what was it, close to 1,500 people off the waiting list and get services moving there, which I thought was really good, and do a lot of work closing the wage gap. There's going to be a lot more that happens with that. We're chasing a moving target where we have so much money being put into the system. I think it's something on the order of 40% of all of the money in circulation was created in the last 2 years. And so when you look at that to inflation and how that works its way through the system, this is an issue that we're all going to be dealing with at the state and at local government continuously, because you can't do that without severe inflationary effects. So there's a lot of things we need to do as a state to try to deal with our federal partner and try to help them figure out some responsibilities so that we can manage things appropriately. Those are things that we continue to work on. I think the other bill that may have an impact that I passed was House Bill 228 that dealt with victims being able to access the reparations funds even before there's been an actual conviction. So a lot of times on the front end for victims to be able to get the care and the help that they need so that you can move forward on convictions. Oftentimes, a victim of violent crime, sexual assault, they're just not in a place to help in the prosecution. And so to get those reparation funds in and help them in the healing on their time actually helps to increase prosecution rates and helps to advance criminal justice. So we got that through that allows us to deal with crime victim reparations on the front end and work through. I think the bill that got the most attention was the sensitive material in schools that everyone called it the book burning bill, and it was really sad. It was unfortunate. I mean, I think Senator Thatcher, when they had it the last night on the session, said, "I can't even show you on the floor of the Senate the materials we're talking about without violating all sorts of state laws for distributing pornography." And these are things in schools. And so that's the kind of material we're talking about. And we just set up a process and applied the exact same standard that applies to what students access on their devices in schools. We already have a criminal standard for that. And we applied that same standard of indecency and pornography to the materials provided by the schools. And so we'll monitor that and follow forward. And then we did something really interesting with a federalism bill that we're going to monitor every action that the federal government takes and have a non-political and apolitical third party look at those federal actions and then flag the kinds of things that violate the roles and responsibilities so that we're staying in our lane. And so we get a non-political look at that. So when someone of the party for the legislature is in power, they don't get a pass. We're looking at the roles and responsibilities no matter who's in office. And then we look at the actions that we take to just simply how we do organizational management, that we keep people in their lane and manage the roles and responsibilities. And so to do that in a very systematic fashion, Senator Fillmore chairs the Federalism Commission with Representative Stratton. So we'll see that report go forward and see what we do there. And that's going to give us an opportunity to work with other states on just how we do government management. So those are a couple of the things that we did, and look forward as we move toward the next year.
Great, thank you. I would like to note that Councilmember McConaughey joined us at 7:15 via Zoom. And then we have a pin for you from our city.
Sorry, here, there. The cord's out.
We appreciate the work that
thank you
you
very
do for us, and we appreciate you joining us tonight.
Thank
The
you, that's
next
very nice.
portion will be with our legal team. Mr. Quayle is going to present tonight, kind of to give us an idea of what we can expect.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
do you mind if I excuse myself to relieve my babysitter?
Oh, if you have
I
a
was-
babysitter
I was
meeting
able
you?
to get a babysitter at the last minute to allow me to come for dinner, but I did promise her that I would be home to put the kids to bed.
You know, I appreciate you coming, Senator
Sure.
Fillmore.
Thank
And
you, guys.
yes, you may go take care of your family. That's a good thing. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Lisa. Appreciate it.
So, Mr. Quayle, share with us. what we
Yes,
can
I'll share
anticipate.
what we can anticipate. That's a good word. Like Tawny talked about, we have about 70 bills, I think, on the tracker that could impact West Jordan or cities specifically. That's about a little over 1,400 pages. So that's kind of like reading War and Peace and the death of Ivan Ilyich back to back. So
And
It's-
Lord of the Rings.
yeah, so that's like I'm a visual learner, so I look at it. Those are like 500 a piece. So that's a lot of paper that staff's going to sift through. So anticipate's a perfect word, Chair. We're working through it. The priorities, the 1, 2s, and 3s, that is possibly going to change as staff works through those bills. Right now, it's based on our first blush look at things, but obviously Tawny doesn't know everything that every department does. Neither do we. I could never know much about planning or economic development as Chris or Scott do. So as we get input from the departments and everybody starts to work together, those priorities could change. But as it sits today, what I have on my list is 18 bills as priority 1 that we've looked at. And again, those are already kind of fluctuating back and forth as we look at those. But that's about 472 pages. So we're only reading The Hunchback of Notre Dame at this point. And I'm kind of watching the Disney version of that on VHS. But we'll come back to you over time as we work through these with code amendments as they need to be brought to you, or oftentimes it might just be plans, like a new general plan or things that need to be updated pursuant to the new bills. So I don't want to duplicate too much what Tawny said. It's hard to talk about implementing bills without kind of reiterating and giving some context. So I'll try and do that quickly, but what I'll try to focus on is where we think and how we think implementation could occur at this point in time with that preliminary look. I'll take Tawny's lead, run through the House bills first, then the Senate bills, and just do it in order of how the bills were numbered. So looking first at HB 22, which is the Open and Public Meetings Act modification. That is one that I believe it can be accomplished at this point in one of 3 ways, primarily through council rules. You could pass a resolution or an ordinance to achieve the substance of HB 22, which unless you want me to, I don't need to reiterate what Tawny said. But most of those will come to you either internally through the council office or if you'd like to pass, resolutions or ordinances, that's an option for you as well. HB 23, that's the first responder mental health amendments. That is one that will really fall to police, fire, and then administrative services through HR, which Tawny mentioned. Derek is already looking at some of these programs. My understanding is we provide some of the services required by HB 23, but not all of them as it exists now. Derek's going to do, my understanding is a search, probably with Diane, see what benefits are out there. But it will also take some analysis once.
David,
Oh,
just
yes, go
for
ahead.
clarification, Derek is our fire chief.
Oh, you know what? I should have clarified
Chief
much more.
Maxfield.
I was referring to Derek Orth, our HR
Oh, Derek
manager.
Wood. Okay.
I
Yeah,
definitely
can you
call
tell
Chief.
us who you're talking about?
Yes, I apologize. Yes, I work closely with Chief Maxfield and Chief Wallentyne. So they're to me like a council member or a legislator or a judge. They always get the formal title. Don't tell Derek Orth I said that he doesn't have a formal title.
I think he's like our newest employee, and you're just
Yep.
okay.
So Derek Orth with Diane Hansen is looking at some of those. There will be some analysis that needs to happen with this bill in particular. Tawny touched on some of those, particularly with the family members and spouses, how we implement that. I'm assuming the fire unions, the fire organizations, police organizations, as well as HR groups will all be looking at this. Things that pop to the front of my mind are a child. Okay, does that end at 18? Does that end when the child's 50? A spouse that goes through a divorce and then remarries. What happens to that spouse? So those are things that will get worked out over time. Right now, they're unknown. But that we'll be able to come back to you with more on how that will be implemented once HR and police and fire have really been able to dig into this a little bit more. The next bill is HB 96. That's the government records fee amendment. Tawny covered this. I don't really have much to add. It's really going to be a training issue, most likely, for police records and the city recorder. Currently, there's timekeeping done. Tangi Sloan, our city recorder, she really manages that and helps with police records. So right now I'm anticipating, not talking to Tangi, that will really be a training issue with the different records custodians throughout the city to make sure we account for time.
Does that affect the consolidated fee schedule at all?
I don't believe it should. Okay. We could check on that though.
Council, if I may, I think we have a note in the fee schedule that says first 15 minutes are free. We may just need an extra footnote, but I don't think we need to change the fee itself.
HB 121, that's the water conservation modifications. At this point, like Tawny talked about, I don't think there's really anything to do. The bulk of this bill relates to state facilities. There is a turf replacement program in this bill, but that really is for retail water consumers, which would be people who are buying water from West Jordan. So it wouldn't directly impact West Jordan. It is something, Tawny be much more of an expert on this than I would. Maybe our residents could be made aware that that's something that could be made available to them once the states put the program in place. Right now, there's rulemaking that needs to happen. So there isn't much, there isn't anything for us to do at this point on HB 121.
We believe that rulemaking will pass that process off to the water conservancy districts. So we anticipate eventually that will come through Jordan Valley, and then we will communicate it to our residents.
So kind of similar to flip your strip kind of program.
That's how it reads. Yeah. HB 169. I don't think Tawny touched on this one, but it's on our list. So the priorities switching around. But this is one that I had on my list. It's the state and local employee disaster services. What it does is it defines all local government employees as local disaster response personnel, which essentially means that with a few small exceptions, any West Jordan City employee in a declared emergency, a local declared emergency, can be called back to work to perform disaster response duties that are different than their regular day-to-day duties. They can't be paid less, but they can be called back. There's only a couple minor exceptions to that. Those are, you cannot be called back immediately in the sense that the employee has the ability to check on the security of their family before returning to work, make sure, your family got out of the house in the earthquake. And employees are exempted from the recall if their immediate family is in imminent danger because of the disaster, family didn't get out of the house or something like that, or the employee's health precludes them from performing disaster response duties. So you got hurt because you didn't get out of your house. But both of those exceptions, the imminent family threat and the health only lasts so long as the danger lasts to the family or the health condition precludes response. So currently, it's my understanding that our emergency manager is working on redrafting and reworking our emergency operations plan. So this is something that could be addressed through that process, and we'll be communicating with him about this new legislation if he's not already aware and isn't already incorporating it. It could also have impacts with human resources as far as general citywide policies in the employee handbook about emergency response. HB 282, that's water-wise landscaping amendments. It basically prohibits the city from barring water-wise landscaping or requiring property owners to install turf in areas less than 8 feet. So essentially park strips or things of that nature. We can still require a site planning process or prohibit certain types of mulches that would be harmful to municipal operations. I'm not sure if that means like the chopped up rubber tire mulch or things of that nature. We can still require that the landscaping be kept in a healthy condition. So at this point, there may be some ordinances required on this one. Scott will really be able to dig into this one and come back to you with recommendations, but we do have landscaping requirements in our city code. So we'll need to look at those and we'll get with Scott and come up with a plan, but that's something where you may potentially see a code amendment come your way. Next one I have here is HB 303. We covered that. It does a lot at this point because it covers so much. This is one where you could see policy, practice, and potentially code amendments come your way in response to this bill. It's going to take a lot of work with community development to look at our existing processes and practices and make sure that we're in compliance with that. So that one, as far as implementation, it's going to take a little bit more of a deep dive with community development, comparison against what's actually occurring, what's in policies, and what may need to happen in city code. Could involve council office as well as the city recorder's office on noticing issues as well that are included in this bill. HB 399, that is the Garrity bill. As far as implementation, there's nothing for the city to do at this point. The Garrity warnings that we already give in advance of taking a Garrity statement satisfy the elements that would need to be satisfied in order for the statement to have a protected classification. So statewide, there may be agencies or governments that need to amend how they warn about Garrity issues, but we do not need to do that.
Hey, can I ask a stupid question?
You can ask any question you'd like.
Where are we at in the other case?
We have hearings on April 14th to discuss a few things. This bill does not moot the litigation. So the litigation is still moving forward. Part of the hearing on the 18th will be a discussion with the judge on the impact of HB 399, how that should be considered in the litigation. Both parties essentially understand at this point that the litigation is not mooted. So that's where we are right now. And then summary judgments will continue to move forward. HB 440, that's the homeless services amendment. Tawny covered that much better than I ever can. There's not much I believe we need to do at this point. Tawny's going to be doing a lot of the work right now for the city. Everything's going to run through, because it runs through the mayors, council of mayors, COG, local homelessness councils. There's not much for the city to do at this point. Tawny may come up with other things as she works through the process. It sounds like the only recommendation I would have is that the city kind of create a point person on homelessness issues, and that may end up, from what I heard tonight, be Tawny, or already is Tawny, but sounds like people are already well on top of that. So, and then 462, HB 462, again, that was covered. As far as implementation goes, that's a lot to unpack.
So are we
Yeah.
gonna make sure that we charge impact fees for ADUs? Sorry, couldn't resist that.
So that's one that will, like Tawny said, take a lot of work with community development before we can really implement much.
The question I do have is, Scott, I know the planning commission last night heard that the modifications to the ADU bill. Do we need to slow roll that and modify it, or is that one okay? And then just do another amendment?
That's fine.
Okay.
So it doesn't, yeah, 462 doesn't affect what.
Okay.
And then the one bill I took out of order is SB 190. For me, it makes sense to consider, and these are the two medical cannabis bills, SB 46 and SB 190 together. The reason I view them together is they both amend Utah Code 2661A 111, specifically Section 2A. So SB 46 amends Section 2 to essentially change the focus from the existing medical cannabis bill from just use to use and prescription, essentially. So the way the law read before this session was government employers, so the city, needed to treat employees using medical cannabis the same way they would an individual using any other controlled substance. So think pain pills. If somebody's using pain pills, we need to treat them the same way if they're using medical cannabis. SB 46 essentially extends that same protection to individuals who hold a medical cannabis card or have a recommendation from a approved medical provider to use medical cannabis. So it essentially says now, if you hold a card or a recommendation to use medical cannabis, that has to be treated the same as a prescription for any other controlled substance. So you're talking about a prescription for pain pills. So it changes the focus from just use to use and holding a prescription. Now the interplay is SB 190 creates two exceptions to Section 2A, even the portion that's amended by SB 46. The two exceptions are the public safety concerns that Tawny spoke about. One relates to specifically post-certified police officers, and the other relates to first responders, which would include police officers, but also your EMTs, paramedics, firefighters, dispatchers, a broader array of people. Now, as to the post-certified officers, the city does not need to comply with 2A. So the city does not need to treat a post-certified police officer who either holds a prescription for medical cannabis or is using medical cannabis the same as someone who has a prescription for pain pills. And what that means is we can create a policy that says, as a police officer, you cannot use medical marijuana and you cannot hold a medical marijuana card or prescription. The reason for that and the rationale for that is federal funding, interplay with federal laws that really impact police officers, as well as there are post statutes that would conflict with that as for police officers. Now, it's a little looser with first responders. With first responders, it isn't a complete bar that the city can do. The city can only prohibit the use of medical marijuana, medical cannabis, 12 hours immediately prior to the first responder shift or during the shift. So it gives the city more ability to create a policy that says, look, you can't use medical cannabis for 12 hours, I'm assuming was a medically or research recommended time to where it would be out of your system. So that way you ensure that, okay, if you're a firefighter and you have a medical cannabis card, great on your days off, but when you need to stop using your prescribed medication 12 hours before you come to work. So implementing those, that's going to be in the police department, in the fire department, and then through human resources, because SB 46 will apply to all employees. And then SB 190 will apply to only those first responders and post-certified police officers. And the police department and fire department also have non-first responder employees and non-certified, post-certified employees as well. So that will all happen administratively through policies. Did I hear a question? No? Okay. SB 89, the water amendments. Again, I don't have too much to add at this point. What I've heard is the same as what Tawny's heard, as far as our plan seems to be pretty well in line with what's required by SB 89. There may need to be some tweaks, but from what I've heard, nothing major. And we will have to wait until the Division of Water Resources comes out with its regional goals, because this is all tied to either meeting or exceeding the regional goals in your water conservation, or if you can kind of show, exceptional circumstances, you can be less than that. But it's really dependent upon, at this point, the Department of or Division of Water Resources. Sorry, this is why people use computers, not paper. But for some reason, I still use paper. SB 110. So that's water as part of the general plan. That was covered. I don't have too much to add there, other than we're working in due course on the general plan right now. So I believe if Larry's point on that, Larry Gardner, city planner, will take that to the group he's working with, the general plan committee, make sure that these are incorporated there, and then the general plan will come forward as usual. So nothing immediate we need to do on that. It's kind of already being taken care of through regular course. The officer intervention and reporting amendments. Two things like Tawny covered. It mandates intervention when an officer sees police misconduct, if it's safe to do so. And then regardless, if an officer observes police misconduct, they need to report that. And there's very specific reporting processes to ensure that, if you see the police chief engaging in that, or your lieutenant, you still have somewhere to go to make the appropriate reporting. That will all be done through policy. The bill itself contemplates it being done through a quote written policy by July. Like Tawny said, our police chief is very involved. He's also very involved with police policy generally. So I'm sure we'll see something coming shortly, but that's not something that will rest on your shoulders. That will be done through policy making at his level. The housing and transit reinvestment zones, I don't need to add much there. We don't currently have one. So at this point, possibly having Scott and Chris sit down and discuss whether that makes sense from their perspective, and then extending the conversation beyond there is probably the next step on implementation as far as that goes. And then the last bill I had on my list was SB 439. That there's not much we need to do there either. That requires the roll call vote to be listed in the meeting minutes. We already do that. So whether that may require an update to any policies or ordinances, we can take a look at. But as far as practices go, we're already complying with this bill. But we'd want to coordinate between the council office, community development, and then city recorder's office for the mayor's committees on that. So that's where we are as far as implementation goes right now. And we'll get you more details and get things firmed up as we can dig into the pages a little bit more.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions from council members? Yeah, great. Does anyone have anything to add? Mr. Langsford, please get a microphone.
So I take this everywhere I go now. This is 462.
Push your button, Scott.
So just wanted to give the council a heads up that
the league is very proactive in doing these deep dives into what this all means, moderate income housing, stationary plans, etc. And Corbin was right earlier. There is a potential for a significant fiscal impact in implementing these stationary plans. However, even though we've got 6 stations in West Jordan, as you know, not all of them are going to be treated the same. And so as I've reached out to my counterparts at WFRC, Wasatch Front Regional Council, they too are still trying to understand what that means and what actually would be the benchmark or the baseline for these stationary plans. And so we'll know a lot more in the coming couple weeks. With that, I've asked, again, WFRC, who will be reviewing these stationary plans, what the end goal is. Why are you requiring all of these municipalities with fixed transit to have these stationary plans? And of course, it's affordable housing to leverage this regional investment. We get all that, but their response was ultimately the cities are going to be asked to convert these stationary plans into legislation, into zoning. Gratefully, we've had zoning in place to leverage these stationaries for a number of years, since 2009. And will we be able to tweak them? Sure. It's always up to the council on what you choose is best. But as we work with the WFRC to understand what we need to actually do, it may not be as significant as we first thought. Meaning, if we already have the zoning in place, if we can create these little stationary plans that are basically in alignment with our zoning, it might be a less of a fiscal impact. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't take this opportunity and look at some of our stations right across the street, for example, City Center. Some of them really do deserve significant, maybe even outside consultants to look at and help leverage existing staff expertise. But I'm excited to go into these deeper dives with the league and Utah APA, and if it's okay with the council, we'd be happy to come back as we gather more information in future council meetings. So that's all I've got as far as that goes. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Lingsford. I just want to thank everyone that's participated tonight. I appreciate it. I think it's helpful for us to hear what's transpired during the legislative session. And I so appreciate our senators and representatives that took time from their busy schedules to join us. So thank you. And also a big shout out, thank you to my fellow council members that came tonight. I really appreciate it. And at that, I will call this meeting.
We probably need to do a motion. I'm going to move to
Go ahead.
Move to adjourn.
I'll second.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion to adjourn by Councilmember Green and a second by Councilmember Bloom. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes.